Everyone says not to make decisions when you're emotional. But that night, as I stood in the corner of our company's lavish anniversary party with champagne dripping down my silk blouse, I made the biggest decision of my life. Jasmine Rodriguez, I whispered to myself, this is your villain origin story. The sound of my boss's laughter still echoed in my ears as he'd accidentally bumped into me, spilling his drink all over my front. The way his eyes narrowed when he leaned in and whispered, maybe this is a sign you don't belong at these executive functions. The way the other VPs snickered behind their flutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back 3 months before that humiliating moment. I was Senior Operations Director at Pinnacle Hospitality Group, the third largest luxury hotel chain in the country. I had clawed my way up over 12 years from front desk receptionist to where I was now, the highest-ranking Latina in the company's history. My boss, Richard Montgomery, had been appointed CEO 2 years ago. He was old money, Ivy League, and made it clear from day one he thought I was an affirmative action hire. Never mind my MBA or the fact that I'd personally turned around 3 failing properties. This quarter's projections are concerning, Richard announced at our executive meeting that morning, his gaze settling on me. Jasmine's southern region is underperforming. I straightened my spine. Actually, if you look at page 17 of my report, you'll see we're up 4% year over year despite the renovation delays at our Miami property, delays your friend's construction company caused. The room fell silent. Richard's jaw tightened. Perhaps if you spent less time compiling reports and more time actually visiting your properties, we wouldn't have these issues. I was on site in Miami 3 times last month, I countered, pulling up the travel receipts on my tablet. I've documented every conversation with the contractors and— Let's move on, he interrupted, turning to Derek, his golf buddy and our CFO. The Northeast numbers look stellar. That evening, I stayed late reviewing acquisition opportunities. Pinnacle had been eyeing smaller boutique chains to absorb. As I scrolled through potential targets, one name caught my eye: Solstice Hotels. A small but exclusive chain with properties in key destinations. And it was in financial trouble. Their CEO had made some bad investments, and they were quietly looking for buyers. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandfather had passed away 6 months ago, leaving me his entire estate. Abuelo had come to this country with nothing but had built a successful real estate business over decades. I had been his only grandchild, his pride and joy. The inheritance had made me wealthy beyond anything I could have imagined. I hadn't told anyone at work. I still drove my 5-year-old Audi and lived in the same condo. The money sat in investment accounts while I figured out what to do with it. But now, staring at the Solstice Hotel's prospectus, a plan began forming in my mind. The next morning, I called an old friend from business school who worked in private equity. Maria, I need some advice. And absolute discretion. For you? Anything, she replied. Over lunch at a small cafe far from our office district, I laid out my idea. You want to buy Solstice Hotels? Personally? Maria's eyebrows shot up. That's ambitious, but also genius. They've got incredible properties. Can you help me do this quietly? I don't want anyone at Pinnacle finding out. Maria's smile turned mischievous. Shell companies it is. I'll set up meetings with their CFO through my firm. They won't know it's you until the papers are signed. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. By day, I endured Richard's subtle jabs and not-so-subtle undermining. By night, I conducted secret negotiations to acquire Solstice. We should discuss your role post-acquisition, Maria said one evening as we reviewed paperwork in her office. You'll need a management team. I twirled my pen between my fingers. I'm keeping their current staff, but I'll need a CEO. You're not taking the position yourself? I shook my head. Not yet. I have unfinished business at Pinnacle first. The papers were signed on a Friday. By Monday morning, I was the new owner of Solstice Hotels, a direct competitor to Pinnacle. No one at my day job had a clue. My plan was to quietly resign in a few weeks, claiming I'd been headhunted. But then came the anniversary party invitation. Pinnacle was celebrating 30 years, and attendance was strongly encouraged for all executives. The event was held at our flagship property downtown. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and executives in designer wear congratulating themselves. I wore a red silk blouse that had cost more than my first month's rent in New York, paired with a black pencil skirt and the diamond earrings Abuelo had given me for my MBA graduation. Jasmine. So glad you could make it, Richard's wife air-kissed. Me, her eyes never quite meeting mine. That color is so festive. I smiled tightly. Thank you, Diane. How's the charity gala planning going? Oh, we had to replace someone on the committee. Some people just couldn't meet the minimum donation requirement. Her smile was razor sharp. I had been unceremoniously dropped from the committee the previous month. I excused myself and headed for the bar. As I waited for my drink, I overheard Richard speaking to our board chairman. Between us, we're looking at restructuring the southern region. Jasmine's nice enough, but she's out of her depth with the luxury market. Our clients expect a certain understanding of their needs. My fingers tightened around my clutch. After all these years, all my accomplishments, I was still just the girl from the Bronx who didn't belong in their world. That's when Richard spotted me. His eyes widened slightly before his face settled into a practiced smile. Jasmine, enjoying the party? He approached with a full champagne flute. It's lovely, I replied coolly. I was just telling Charles about your region's performance. Such a challenging market. He placed a hand on my shoulder, positioning himself so the chairman couldn't see his face. Maybe focus less on those reports and more on client relationships? He whispered, his smile never faltering. As I opened my mouth to respond, he suddenly stumbled forward, his champagne splashing across my blouse and down my skirt. Oh, how clumsy of me, he exclaimed, not bothering to hide his smirk. Several nearby executives chuckled. As I stood there, champagne soaking through the silk to my skin, Richard leaned in close. Maybe this is a sign you don't belong at these executive functions. Time seemed to slow as I felt everyone's eyes on me. The whispers, the barely concealed amusement. 12 years of proving myself, and still, I was just a joke to them. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I dabbed at my blouse with a cocktail napkin, smiled pleasantly at Richard, and excused myself to the restroom. Alone in the marble-lined ladies' room, I stared at my reflection. The red silk now stained darker across my chest. My carefully applied makeup still perfect. My eyes blazing with a fire I'd never seen before. I pulled out my phone and texted Maria. Move up the timeline. Announcement tomorrow. Her reply came instantly. Are you sure? What happened? I took a deep breath and typed, I'm done playing by their rules. By their rules. I returned to the party with a fresh blouse from my emergency car stash, a habit from years of early morning meetings and late nights at the office. Walking back into that glittering ballroom felt different now. The champagne had washed away. My last shred of hesitation. Richard barely glanced my way when I re-entered, deep in conversation with investors who'd flown in for the celebration. I circulated smiling, laughing at jokes, the perfect executive while my phone buzzed with texts from Maria finalizing tomorrow's announcement. You cleaned up well, Derek, the CFO said as he sidled up to me. Richard can be intense when he's had a few drinks. It's fine, I replied, sipping water that looked like vodka soda. I needed a clear head. We all have our moments. Derek lowered his voice. Between us, the board's not thrilled with his leadership style. 3 VPs resigning in 18 months. Isn't a good look. He studied my face. You've outlasted them all. How do you do it? I tilted my head. I learned early that the game is rigged, so I had to create my own rulebook. He laughed, thinking it was a joke. Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. We need stability right now, especially with these acquisition targets in play. If only, he knew. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and strategic avoidance. At precisely 10 p.m., I made my exit, stopping briefly to thank our hostess, corporate etiquette that Abuela had drilled into me alongside her lessons about never letting them see you sweat. In my car, I kicked off my heels and called Maria. Everything's set, she answered without preamble. Press release goes out at 8 a.m. Solstice's board has been notified of their new owner. They're surprised. Good surprised? Let's call it cautiously optimistic. The CEO wants to meet you tomorrow afternoon. I pulled out of the parking garage into the cool night air. And the special condition? Contractually binding, as requested. Solstice cannot be sold to or merged with Pinnacle Hospitality Group or any of its subsidiaries for a minimum of 5 years without your express written approval as majority shareholder. I smiled. Richard had been salivating over Solstice's Beverly Hills and Aspen properties for years. The acquisition was supposed to be his crowning achievement this quarter. Perfect. And my identity? Revealed only to their C-suite under strict NDAs. To everyone else, you're just the representative of the investment group. When I arrived home, I didn't immediately go inside. I sat in my car in the quiet darkness of the underground garage, remembering all the moments that had led to this night. Richard wasn't the first to underestimate me. My entire life had been a series of people looking at my background. Daughter of immigrants, scholarship kid, woman of color in a white man's industry, and deciding my ceiling was lower than theirs. My first hotel manager had patted my head when I said I wanted to run my own property someday. Stick to the front desk, honey. That's where your people skills shine. My MBA classmates had asked if I was in the right classroom on the first day. The bank loan officer who denied my small business application had suggested I try something more manageable, like a food truck. Each time I'd smiled, worked harder, planned longer. Each slight became another brick in the foundation I was building. But tonight was different. Tonight, for the first time, I wasn't planning to rise above or work around. Tonight, I decided to hit back. I slept surprisingly well and woke before my alarm. As I applied my makeup, I chose a bold red lipstick, my armor. The woman in the mirror looked dangerous, and I liked it. At 7:55 a.m., I sat in my office at Pinnacle, door closed, computer open to Maria's email containing the press release. At exactly 8 a.m., I clicked refresh on the business news site. There, it was, Solstice Hotels acquired by private investment group. The article was brief but contained all the key points we'd crafted. Solstice would maintain its unique brand identity while expanding to new markets. The current management team would stay in place. And the critical line: the acquisition removes Solstice from the market as a potential target for larger chains, including Pinnacle Hospitality Group, which had reportedly been exploring a bid. At 8:07, Richard burst through my office door without knocking. "Did you see this?" he demanded, waving his phone. His face was flushed, tie slightly askew. I looked up calmly. "Good morning, Richard." "See what?" "Solstice. Some investment group swooped in overnight. All our work, our planning." He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "I was in final talks with their CEO last week." "How unfortunate," I said, my voice neutral while my heart raced with adrenaline. "Perhaps they found better terms elsewhere. I need to know who's behind this." "Derek's calling contacts at all the major banks." He paced my small office. "This has Westbrook Capital written all over it. They've been trying to block our expansion for years." I nodded sympathetically. "Would you like me to reach out to some of my contacts? I might have connections that could help." He stopped pacing and really looked at me for the first time that morning. I could see the calculations behind his eyes, weighing his desperation against his pride in asking for my help. "Yes," he finally said. "Use whatever resources you have. This is a company emergency." "Consider it done," I replied, already reaching for my phone. "I'll start right away." After he left, I texted Maria. Phase 1 complete. He took the bait. Her. Response came seconds later. "Your 2 p.m. meeting with Solstice's team is confirmed. Ready for Phase 2? I smiled. "Absolutely." The morning crawled by as news of the Solstice acquisition spread through the office. Richard called an emergency executive meeting for 11 a.m. "This is a significant setback to our growth strategy," he announced to the room. "Solstice was perfect for our portfolio, and now it's gone." "Who bought them?" asked our head of marketing. Richard's jaw tightened. "Some private investment group. We're working on identifying the principals." "What's our next move?" Derek asked, looking genuinely concerned. The loss of Solstice would affect his quarterly bonus too. "We pivot," Richard declared with false confidence. "There are other boutique chains. Jasmine's team identified several alternatives in their report last month." All eyes turned to me. My report had indeed listed alternatives, but I'd made it clear that Solstice was the only one that made strategic sense for our brand. "That's correct," I said smoothly. "However, the other options all have significant drawbacks. Azure Hotels is overleveraged, Monarch needs complete rebranding, and Diamond Properties has location redundancy with our existing portfolio." Richard's glare could have melted steel. "Then find better options. That's your job, isn't it?" I met his gaze directly. "Of course. I'll prepare an updated analysis by the end of the week." As the meeting adjourned, Richard held me back with a hand on my arm. "I need solutions, Jasmine, not problems. After last night's incident, I'd think you'd be eager to prove your value here." I looked pointedly at his hand until he removed it. "I always deliver, Richard. You know that." "See that you do," he muttered before striding away. At 1:30, I told my assistant I had a doctor's appointment and slipped out of the building. The Solstice corporate headquarters was only 15 minutes away, close enough that I'd avoided visiting in person during the acquisition process for fear of being spotted by a Pinnacle colleague. As I rode the elevator to their offices, I felt strangely calm. For years, I'd operated as if one mistake would send me tumbling back down the corporate ladder. Now, for the first time, I was holding all the cards. The elevator doors opened to reveal a modern reception area with the Solstice logo, a stylized sun, gleaming on the wall. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Ms. Rodriguez? They're expecting you in the boardroom." As I walked down the hallway, I caught my reflection in the glass walls. Head high, shoulders back, the walk of someone who belonged, not the posture. I'd carefully practiced for Pinnacle, but something more authentic. I paused at the boardroom door, took a deep breath, and stepped into my new future. Inside, 5 people rose as I entered. I recognized Thomas Wells, the CEO, from my research. He stepped forward with his hand extended. "Ms. Rodriguez, I must say, when we were told the identity of our mysterious buyer, I was surprised." I shook his hand firmly. "I imagine so. Thank you for agreeing to meet on short notice." "Of course. It's not every day your company is purchased by a senior executive from your chief competitor." His tone was cautious, but not hostile. "I believe we have a lot to discuss." I smiled as I took my seat at the head of the table. "Indeed we do. Let's start with my vision for Solstice's future, and how it intersects with my present at Pinnacle Hospitality Group. For 2 hours I outlined my vision for Solstice. Not as a subsidiary to be absorbed, but as a beacon of excellence in the luxury hotel space. One that would directly compete with Pinnacle but with a different philosophy. While Pinnacle catered to old money and business travelers, Solstice would target the new generation of wealth, tech entrepreneurs, creative professionals, and international clients looking for authentic experiences rather than predictable luxury. We're keeping your management team intact, I explained. Your people understand this market better than anyone. What you've lacked is capital and certain connections that I can provide. Thomas leaned forward. And your position at Pinnacle? Forgive me for asking, but this creates an obvious conflict of interest. I'm resigning from Pinnacle, I replied, watching their expressions shift from suspicion to interest. But not immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa, narrowed her gaze. You're planning something. I smiled. Call it a transition period. I need certain pieces in place before I make my departure public. Does this have anything to do with Richard Montgomery? Thomas asked. Industry gossip says there's no love lost between you two. I maintained my composure, though I was surprised by his directness. This acquisition is about business, not personal vendettas. Richard's leadership style and my vision for hospitality simply don't align. Not entirely a lie. My plan wasn't just about revenge, though that was certainly a delicious bonus. In the meantime, I continued, I'll be operating at arm's length. Maria Collins from Westbrook Partners will serve as my proxy for day-to-day decisions until I can step in fully as chairwoman. I'll be available for strategic guidance, but my name stays off all paperwork for now. And when do you plan to resign? From Pinnacle? Asked their head of operations. When it will be most instructive, I replied. For everyone involved. After the meeting concluded with tentative expressions of support, Thomas walked me to the elevator. Off the record, he said quietly. I've met Richard Montgomery at industry events. The man's reputation precedes him. It does, I acknowledged. If whatever you're planning knocks him down a peg, I won't be heartbroken. He extended his hand. Welcome to Solstice, Ms. Rodriguez. Back at Pinnacle, I slipped into my office unnoticed. Richard was visible through his glass-walled corner office, gesticulating wildly on a phone call. I spent the afternoon sending innocuous emails and finalizing the next phase of my plan. At 5:15, a message from Richard popped up. My office, now. I straightened my blazer, grabbed a notepad, and walked calmly across the executive floor. His assistant avoided eye contact as I passed, never a good sign. Richard was standing at his window back to the door. Close it, he instructed without turning around. I did so and took a seat without being invited. I've been on calls all day trying to salvage this Solstice situation, he said, still facing the window. Do you know what I learned? The investment group isn't Westbrook. It's not any of our usual competitors. He turned, his face tightly controlled. It's a shell company registered 3 months ago. No history, no portfolio, just deep pockets and precise timing. Interesting, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. Could it be foreign investors? Middle Eastern or Chinese money? That was my first thought. He sat behind his desk. But my contact at Morgan Stanley says the funds were wired from a domestic account. Old money, by his assessment. I tilted my head. Curious. Did your contact have any theories? Nothing concrete. Richard drummed his fingers on his desk. What? About your connections? Anything useful? Not yet. I consulted my notepad as if reviewing actual information. My sources suggest it might be a tech billionaire looking to diversify, but that's unconfirmed. Richard nodded, momentarily satisfied. Keep digging, and I need that alternative acquisition report by tomorrow, not the end of the week. That's not realistic. A proper analysis takes… Tomorrow, he interrupted. You're always bragging about your work ethic. Prove it, I stood. As you wish. Will there be anything else? He waved his hand dismissively, already turning to his computer. Outside his office, I texted Maria. Accelerate phase 3. He's getting desperate. That night, I worked from home, though not on the report Richard demanded. Instead, I reviewed confidential Pinnacle documents I'd legally accumulated over years. Strategies, vulnerabilities, client lists, all obtained through proper channels during my employment, all about to become extremely valuable to Solstice. My phone rang just after midnight. Maria. "You won't believe what just happened," she said without preamble. "Richard called Thomas directly, offered to buy Solstice at a 15% premium over what you paid." I sat up straighter. "Already? That's faster than I expected." Thomas played it perfectly. Said he'd need to consult with the new ownership group, but expressed strong reservations about Pinnacle's corporate culture. "Mentioned hearing troubling things about how they treat certain executives," I laughed. "I'd have paid good money to see Richard's face. It gets better." Richard name-dropped 3 board members, implying they'd ensure the merger would be handled appropriately if Thomas cooperated. Basically promised him a golden parachute while threatening to clean house otherwise. "Please tell me that's recorded." Every word. Thomas called me immediately after, as instructed. I closed my laptop, my mind racing. Richard's moving too quickly, making mistakes. He probably hasn't even informed the board he's making these offers. Exactly what I thought. How do you want to proceed? I considered our options. Send the recording to me. No action yet. Let's see what tomorrow brings. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying scenes from my 12 years at Pinnacle. The bye. Nights I'd worked until 2 a.m. to prove my worth. The family events I'd missed. The condescension thinly veiled as mentorship. The promotions that came only after I'd already been doing the job for months. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I forwarded the recording of Richard's call to my personal email, then composed 2 more emails without sending them. One to Pinnacle's board of directors, another to Richard himself, both with the recording attached, both ready when I needed them. I arrived at the office early, before most of the executive team. To my surprise, Richard was already there, looking as though he hadn't slept. Rodriguez. My office. This time his assistant wasn't even at her desk. I followed him into his office, which he'd apparently had cleaned overnight. No coffee cups, no scattered papers. Uncharacteristically tidy. "Close the door and sit," he instructed, his voice unnaturally calm. I complied, crossing my legs and waiting. "I've been doing some digging of my own," he began, sliding a folder across his desk toward me. "About Solstice's new ownership." My heart rate increased, but I maintained my composure as I opened the folder. Inside was a printout of a business registration for Aurora Investments LLC, the shell company Maria had created for me. "Fascinating," I said, closing the folder and sliding back. "Have you identified the principals? Not yet, but I did find something else." He pulled out another folder. "Your travel records for the past 3 months. You've taken 4 personal days that coincide precisely with meetings I now know were held between Solstice executives and this mystery buyer." I raised an eyebrow. "You're tracking my personal days? That seems inappropriate, Richard." "Cut the crap, Jasmine. I know you're involved somehow. Consultant? Broker? Whatever your role, you've been working both sides." I allowed myself a small smile. "That's quite an accusation." "It's not an accusation yet. It's a private conversation between colleagues." His tone had shifted to what I recognized as his negotiation voice. "Look, I understand ambition. God knows I've made moves myself over the years. If you're involved with this Aurora group, you could be useful." "Useful how?" I asked, genuinely curious about where he was going with this. "Bring them to the table. Convince them to sell Solstice to us. I'll make it worth your while. VP position, substantial bonus, board seat within 2 years." I almost laughed. The very things I'd earned 10 times over, now offered as a bribe. "That's generous," I said instead. "But what makes you think I have any influence with Aurora Investments?" "Don't play games," he snapped, mask slipping briefly. Your connections in the industry have always been unusual for someone of your background. I'm offering you a chance to cement your position here. The alternative. The threat hung in the air between us. And what is the alternative, Richard? I kept my voice level. The board won't look kindly on an executive who helped a competitor maneuver against us. Conflict of interest investigations can be messy. Now I did laugh. Is that what you'd tell them? That I somehow orchestrated a multi-million-dollar acquisition to spite you? That sounds rather paranoid. His face flushed. I'd tell them you leaked proprietary information. That's why Solstice suddenly vanished from the market just as we were about to make our move. Serious allegations, I noted. You'd need proof. In boardrooms like ours, the accusation is often enough. He leaned forward. You've worked too hard to lose it all now. Be smart. I stood, smoothing my skirt. I'll consider your offer. Is that all? His eyes narrowed. The Acquisition Alternatives Report. Where is it? On your desk by end of day, as promised. As I reached for the door, he added, We're not done with this conversation, Jasmine. I turned back with a smile that felt dangerous even to me. Oh, I think we're just getting started. Back at my desk, I unlocked my bottom drawer and pulled out the emergency bourbon I kept for crisis negotiations. The glass trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the electric thrill of finally confronting Richard directly. This wasn't just about professional redemption, this was personal liberation. My phone vibrated with a text from Maria. Board meeting called for tomorrow morning, not on the official calendar. My pulse quickened. Richard was making his move, trying to secure board approval for a Solstice counteroffer before I could fully cement my position. Time to accelerate. I composed an email to Thomas Wells with the subject line, Contingency Plan B, and attached a document we'd prepared weeks ago. Within minutes, my phone rang. Are you sure you want to go this route? Thomas asked, his voice. Oh. It's aggressive. Richard's forcing my hand, I replied, watching through the glass walls as Richard huddled with Derek in his office. He's calling a secret board meeting tomorrow. Your inside source is reliable? Always has been. My assistant, Zoe, had been with me for 6 years and had cultivated relationships with every executive assistant in the building. She knew about after-hours meetings before most board members did. All right, Thomas said after a pause. I'll have the team ready, but Jasmine, once this goes live, I know, no going back. I took another sip of bourbon. I'm counting on it. I spent the rest of the afternoon crafting the acquisition alternatives report Richard had demanded, a masterpiece of malicious compliance. Every option I presented was thoroughly researched, impeccably cited, and subtly devastating. Azure Hotel's debt structure made them untouchable for at least 2 quarters. Monarch's branding issues would require a complete overhaul costing tens of millions. Diamond Properties had location redundancies that would necessitate selling off assets at a loss. The report was truthful, comprehensive, and would make Richard look like an incompetent strategist if he presented any of these alternatives to the board. I delivered it to his office at 4:59 p.m. His assistant had returned but avoided eye contact as I placed the thick binder on her desk. Make sure he gets this right away, I said pleasantly. It's the alternative acquisition report he requested. She nodded silently, her expression a mixture of pity and alarm that told me everything I needed to know. Richard had been talking about me. As I walked to the elevator, my phone buzzed with another text from Maria. Phase 3 ready to launch on your command. I paused in the lobby, looking around at the gleaming marble and the imposing Pinnacle logo mounted on the wall. For 12 years, I'd walked through this space feeling like an imposter, measuring every word, gesture, and decision against an impossible standard. Even as I'd risen through the ranks, that feeling had never quite disappeared. No more. I texted back, execute at 7 a.m. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but anticipation. I rose before dawn, dressed carefully. In a charcoal suite, Abuela had helped me pick out the last time I'd visited her in the nursing home. For battle days, she'd said with a wink, when you need to remind them who they're dealing with. I was at the office by 6:30 a.m., settled at my desk with coffee, waiting for the storm. At precisely 7 a.m., business news sites across the country published the press release we'd prepared. Solstice Hotels announces expansion, names Jasmine Rodriguez as chairwoman and CEO. The release included my professional photo and a brief biography highlighting my 12 years at Pinnacle. It detailed the planned expansion of Solstice into markets that directly competed with Pinnacle's most profitable properties. And the kicker, a quote from me about bringing fresh, diverse leadership to an industry too long, dominated by outdated perspectives. The industry blogs picked it up immediately, their headlines growing more sensational by the minute. Pinnacle exec. Secretly buys. Competitor. Hotel industry shocked as Rodriguez defects to rival, corporate espionage, or brilliant strategy. Rodriguez makes power move. My email exploded with notifications. I ignored them all, waiting for the one that mattered. At 7:36 a.m., Richard burst into my office without knocking. His face was mottled red, a vein pulsing at his temple. "You?" he sputtered, tossing his tablet onto my desk. The screen showed the press release, my professional smile looking back at us. "You think you can betray this company? Betray me?" I leaned back in my chair. "Good morning, Richard. I see you've read the news." "The board meeting is in 20 minutes, he hissed. "You're finished at Pinnacle. I'm having security clear your office while you try to explain yourself to the directors." I stood, gathering my portfolio. Perfect. I was hoping to speak with them anyway. His eyes narrowed. "You're not understanding the situation. This is the end of your career. I'll make sure of it." "You're half right," I replied, stepping around my desk. "This is certainly an ending, but not for me." His hand shot out, gripping my arm. "You ungrateful, remove your hand," I said quietly. "Or I'll add assault to the recording." He dropped my arm as if burned. "Recording?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the screen. "Recording, 7:36 a.m., active." "You can't record me without consent," he blustered. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state," I agreed. "Except in cases where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy, such as an office with glass walls and an open door. But I wasn't referring to this recording." I tapped my phone, pulling up the audio file Maria had sent me. Richard's voice filled the room. "The board won't be an issue. I can guarantee a smooth transition if you cooperate. The Southern Region leader, Rodriguez. She'll be the first to go once the acquisition is complete." I stopped the playback. "Sounds like the unauthorized offers you made to Thomas Wells at Solstice might interest our board. Especially the part where you promised to clean house without board approval." The blood drained from his face. "You set me up." "No, Richard. You did this yourself. Every undermining comment, every accidental exclusion from meetings, every project, credited to your golf buddies instead of the people who actually did the work. The champagne was just the final straw." "This is about the party?" His voice rose in disbelief. "For God's sake, it was an accident." "We both know it wasn't." I checked my watch. The board is waiting." As we walked toward the boardroom, a security guard approached with a box of my belongings. "Mr. Montgomery ordered," he began. "Change of plans, Jim," I said smoothly. "Mr. Montgomery and I will be in a meeting. Please return those to my office." The guard looked between us, confused by Richard's silent fury. After a moment, he nodded and walked away. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked our progress, expressions ranging from shock to calculation to suppressed Amusement. Ms. Rodriguez, Chairman Wallace said, his bushy eyebrows raised. I believe you have some explaining to do. Yes, sir. I took a seat without waiting for an invitation. Richard remained standing, fists clenched at his sides. I've prepared a full briefing. I opened my portfolio and passed copies of a document to each board member. This details my acquisition of Solstice Hotels through my private investment firm, Aurora Investments. You'll find all the relevant legal disclosures. On page 3. Legal disclosures? The CFO echoed. Yes. There is no non-compete clause in my employment contract that prevents me from making personal investments. Additionally, while employed at Pinnacle, I have maintained strict ethical boundaries. All meetings with Solstice occurred during my personal time, all communications through personal devices, and no proprietary Pinnacle information was shared? She's lying, Richard interjected. She used inside information about our acquisition plans. I turned to him with a calm smile. Actually, Richard, the public target list was created after I began my private negotiations. It could be argued that Pinnacle's interest in Solstice was informed by my work, not the other way around. The board's legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, flipped through my document. This appears to be in order. Unusual, but not technically a breach of contract or fiduciary duty. She looked up. Though I question the wisdom of remaining at Pinnacle while finalizing this arrangement. A fair point, I acknowledged. Which is why I'm tendering my resignation, effective immediately. I slid another document onto the table. However, before I go, there's something else the board should hear. I played the recording of Richard's conversation with Thomas Wells. As his voice filled the room, promising board seats and threatening employees without authorization, Richard's face shifted from anger to something close to fear. When the recording finished, Chairman Wallace removed his glasses. Mr. Montgomery, is this accurate? Richard straightened his tie. Wallace, this is clearly a manipulated. Answer the question, the chairman interrupted. Did you make these offers to Solstice's CEO without board approval? The silence stretched. Finally, Richard nodded stiffly. Wallace sighed heavily. The board will need to discuss this privately. He glanced at me. Ms. Rodriguez, while your actions were unconventional, they appear to have been legal. Your resignation is accepted. I trust you'll coordinate with HR for an orderly transition. I stood, gathering my portfolio. Of course. As I reached the door, Richard found his voice again. This isn't over, Jasmine. I turned back to face the board one final time. Actually, it is over, except for one last thing. I met each board member's eyes before continuing. Solstice Hotels will be sending a formal communication later today. We're interested in exploring potential partnership opportunities with Pinnacle, excluding the Southern Region properties, which we'd like to acquire outright. The board members exchanged glances. Wallace leaned forward. And who would be our point of contact for these discussions? Me, I replied with a smile. I'll be returning to this boardroom, gentlemen, but next time I'll be sitting on the other side of the table. As the boardroom door closed behind me, I heard Richard's shout cut off by Wallace's stern command for order. I walked through the executive floor with my head high, past the stunned faces of colleagues who'd already seen the news, past Zoe, who gave me a small, secret thumbs up. For the first time in 12 years, I left Pinnacle Hospitality Group without carrying the weight of others' expectations. Instead, I carried something far more valuable. Power, and I was just getting started. The media frenzy that followed nearly broke my phone with notifications. By noon, I was trending on Twitter with the hashtag, #BossMove. Business reporters were calling for interviews. 3 headhunters reached out about CEO positions at other companies, but I wasn't interested in any of it. Not yet. You've gone viral, Maria said when I walked into her office that afternoon. She turned her monitor to show me a business news site featuring my photo alongside a headline, Hotel Industry Shakeup, How Jasmine Rodriguez rewrote the rules of corporate power. Let's hope the publicity doesn't backfire, I replied, sinking into the chair across from her desk. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was fading, leaving me surprisingly hollow. Maria studied my face. Having second thoughts? No, I didn't hesitate. Just processing. I spent so long fighting for a seat at their table. Now I've flipped the damn thing over, and I'm not sure what comes next. What comes next is you run Solstice like the badass CEO you are. She pushed a stack of folders toward me. The transition team is waiting in the conference room. Thomas brought the executive staff. They've got questions. I nodded, gathering the folders. And Richard? Maria's smile turned predatory. Last I heard, the Pinnacle board called an emergency session that's still ongoing. 4 hours and counting. They'll keep him, I predicted, at least temporarily. Firing their CEO the same day they lose an executive to a competitor would spook investors. Maybe. She stood, straightening her blazer. But he'll be on a very short leash. The Solstice executive team looked at me with a mixture of wariness and curiosity when I entered their conference room. These were my employees now, an absolutely surreal thought after 12 years of answering to others. Thank you all for your patience during this transition, I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. I know my identity as your buyer came as a surprise. That's putting it mildly, said Vanessa, the CFO. We've spent months preparing defense strategies against Pinnacle's acquisition attempts. Now we're run by their former executive. Former being the operative word, I replied. My connection to Pinnacle is severed, but my knowledge of their operations, all legally obtained, is now one of Solstice's greatest assets. Thomas leaned forward. The board's primary concern is your vision. Is this purely a revenge play against Richard Montgomery, or do you have a genuine strategy for Solstice? The question was blunt, but fair. I opened the first folder, revealing the 5-year plan I'd spent months developing. Revenge makes for exciting headlines, but it's a terrible business model, I said. This is about creating something better than what Pinnacle offers. They've cornered the market on traditional luxury, catering to an aging demographic. We'll target the next generation of wealth, tech entrepreneurs, creative professionals, sustainability-focused travelers. I walked them through the plan, boutique experiences with cutting-edge technology, locally sourced amenities, partnerships with emerging designers and chefs, and staff profit sharing that would revolutionize service quality. Ambitious, Vanessa noted when I finished. And expensive. I'm not just the CEO, I reminded them. I'm the owner. My personal investment covers the initial capital requirements, and the projected ROI justifies the expenditure. By the end of the 4-hour meeting, the tension had eased. Not completely. I was still an outsider who had orchestrated a takeover, but the detailed strategy had answered their most pressing concerns. As the team filed out, Thomas lingered. The Pinnacle board reached out, he said quietly. They're requesting a meeting to discuss your partnership proposal. Without Richard? Thomas nodded. The chairman specifically asked that Montgomery not be included in the initial conversation. I smiled. Interesting. Schedule it for next week. Let them sweat a little. That evening, I finally returned the dozens of calls and messages I'd received. Family first. Abuela was beside herself with pride, though she pretended to be scandalized by my sneakiness. My mother alternated between proud tears and practical concerns about my new workload. My younger brother, a software engineer in Austin, just laughed and said, "Leave it to Jazz to turn a cocktail stain into a corporate takeover." As I was hanging up, my doorbell rang. Checking the security camera, I was surprised to see Derek, Pinnacle's CFO, standing in my hallway holding a bottle of wine. I opened the door cautiously. "This is unexpected. Peace offering," he said, holding up the bottle, an expensive Cabernet. And perhaps a reconnaissance mission. May I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Derek had never been directly antagonistic toward me, though he'd certainly enabled Richard's behavior. The board sent you, I guessed, leading him to my living room. Not officially. He settled onto my sofa while I fetched glasses, but they wouldn't be upset to get some insight into your intentions. I handed him a glass and took the armchair opposite. My press release was pretty clear. Your press release was a declaration of war. He sipped the wine. Impressive vintage. I've been saving it for a special occasion. He smiled ruefully. Like destroying Richard Montgomery's career? Is that what's happening? Derek loosened his tie. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. Wallace was incandescent about those unauthorized offers Richard made to Solstice. The legal counsel spent an hour outlining potential securities violations. I felt a twinge of satisfaction but kept my expression neutral. Sounds unpleasant. Richard's on probation, effectively. They installed 2 board members to oversee all acquisition activities. He studied me over his wine glass. Your timing was impeccable, by the way. One day before our quarterly earnings report, which will now be overshadowed by this scandal. Pure coincidence, I lied smoothly. Of course. He didn't believe me for a second. The board is interested in your partnership proposal, though they're skeptical of your motives. My motives are profit and growth for Solstice. If a limited partnership with Pinnacle serves that goal, I'm open to discussion. Derek leaned forward. And if that partnership required Richard's removal as a condition? Now we were getting to it. I'd be concerned about entering any partnership where leadership changes were dictated by outside entities, I replied carefully. Even if those changes were already in progress internally. He set down his glass. There's a growing faction on the board that believes Richard's leadership style has become a liability. Your departure, and the manner of it, has raised questions about retention of key talent. I considered this information. Derek wouldn't be here, sharing board deliberations, without tacit approval from someone with power. He was testing waters, building bridges. For the sake of transparency, I said, my partnership proposal specifically excludes the Southern Region properties because I intend to compete directly with Pinnacle in those markets. I believe our management approach will yield superior results, and I want a clean test case to prove it. Derek's eyebrows rose. You're challenging Richard to a head-to-head competition? Not Richard. Pinnacle. Unless the leadership changes you're hinting at come to pass. Interesting. He finished his wine. The board meets again tomorrow morning. I should have updates by noon. After he left, I called Maria. Derek just left my apartment. The sharks are circling Richard. Already? She sounded delighted. I expected them to at least wait until the quarterly earnings. He said Wallace was furious about the unauthorized offers. As he should be. Those were rookie mistakes. Maria paused. What's your next move? I looked out my window at the city lights. Schedule a breakfast meeting with Wallace before the board convenes. I think it's time to discuss the specific terms of our potential partnership. And those terms would be? The complete restructuring of Pinnacle's executive leadership, starting with a new CEO. The next morning, I met Chairman Wallace at a discreet restaurant known for hosting high-level business discussions. The hostess led me to a private dining room where the 68-year-old chairman waited, looking more worn than I'd ever seen him. Ms. Rodriguez, he greeted me, not rising from his seat. You've caused quite a stir. Change usually does. I settled across from him. Thank you for meeting. Privately. Wallace studied me with shrewd eyes that had evaluated countless deals over his 40-year career. You know, when Richard first hired you for the regional position, I questioned his judgment. Not because of your qualifications, which were impeccable, but because you struck me as too ambitious to remain in a supporting role for long. You weren't wrong. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Clearly not, though I didn't anticipate. this. Few did, I acknowledged, including Richard. The server brought coffee and departed silently. Wallace waited until we were alone before continuing. Your partnership proposal. Derek indicated there are specific conditions attached. I nodded. Leadership changes. Richard. For starters. I added cream to my coffee. The culture at Pinnacle flows from the top. Richard cultivated an executive team in his image, with a few exceptions. Such as yourself. I survived. Others didn't. You've lost 3 VPs in 18 months, all women or people of color. That's not coincidence, Chairman. Wallace sighed heavily. The board has been monitoring the turnover. Richard attributes it to competitive poaching. Convenient explanation. But not entirely accurate, I suspect. He looked tired suddenly. I've been chairman for 16 years, Ms. Rodriguez. Pinnacle has grown tremendously under my guidance, but perhaps I've been too hands-off with cultural issues. This was more self-reflection than I'd expected from Wallace, who was known for his ruthless focus on numbers and growth. It's not too late to correct course, I offered. My partnership proposal includes a framework for cultural transformation alongside the business integration, at the cost of Richard's position. Yes. Wallace studied me. You really despise him, don't you? I considered my answer carefully. This isn't about personal feelings. Richard represents a leadership approach that's increasingly out of step with the industry's future. His methods alienate key talent, his biases limit innovation, and his behavior creates legal liability. All fair points. Wallace sipped his coffee. If, hypothetically, the board were already considering leadership changes, what would your partnership proposal look like? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. This outlines the integration of Pinnacle's luxury properties, with Solstice's boutique approach, maintaining both brands but sharing operational infrastructure. The Southern Region properties would transfer to Solstice management as a test case for the new model. Wallace skimmed the document. And Pinnacle's leadership? A new CEO, selected by the board with input from key stakeholders, including Solstice. A diverse executive team built on merit rather than connections. And a board seat for me as part of the partnership agreement. His eyebrows rose. Ambitious. Necessary, I countered. For the partnership to work, both organizations need aligned values. Wallace closed the folder. The board meets in 1 hour. I'll present your proposal, without attribution for now. Depending on how the Richard situation resolves, we may reconvene this afternoon. I nodded. I'll make myself available. As he gathered his things, Wallace paused. One question, Ms. Rodriguez. If you had Richard's job now, after everything, what would you do differently? Everything, I replied without hesitation, starting with how we value our people. Back at Solstice headquarters, I found a team of IT specialists setting up my new office under Maria's supervision. How was Wallace? She asked as we watched the technicians install my secure line. Receptive, more than I expected. Pinnacles. Stock dropped 3 points at opening. The market doesn't like executive drama. I smirked. Convenient timing. Almost as if someone leaked concerns about leadership stability to key analysts last night, Maria said innocently. Almost. I squeezed her arm gratefully. Any word from Thomas about the executive meeting? They're waiting for you in the conference room. Quarterly projections and the transition plan are on the agenda. I nodded, straightening my shoulders. Time to be CEO. As I walked to the conference room, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Pinnacle Hospitality Group Board calls emergency session amid leadership concerns. The game was entering its final move. The Solstice executive meeting lasted 3 hours. Unlike the tension-filled Pinnacle sessions I'd endured for years, this one felt different, challenging but collaborative. These people weren't fighting for scraps of recognition. They were building something. Your 5-year plan is ambitious, Thomas concluded as we wrapped up. but the quarterly projections look solid. If we execute the Miami property relaunch as planned, we'll see immediate revenue growth. Speaking of Miami, Vanessa interjected, there's the matter of the construction delays. The same contractor that's been giving Pinnacle problems. A smile tugged at my lips. Actually, I have some thoughts on that. Get me the contract by end of day. As the team filed out, my phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Board meeting ended. Richard suspended pending investigation. Wallace wants to meet. How soon? My heart raced as I typed back. 4 p.m., Solstice headquarters. Thomas raised an eyebrow when I told him to prepare the executive conference room for Pinnacle visitors. That was fast, he remarked. Thought you were going to make them sweat. Plans change. I gazed out at the Solstice logo gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sometimes they fall apart entirely. I spent the next hour on a video call with the Miami property manager, authorizing a complete replacement of the problematic contractor. Coincidentally, the same one that had been causing delays for Pinnacle's renovations. Richard's golf buddy wouldn't be getting any more sweetheart deals. At 3:55, my assistant buzzed. Chairman Wallace and the Pinnacle delegation are here. I smoothed my skirt and took a deep breath. Abuela's voice echoed in my mind. Remember who? You are in victory, Majida. That shows your true character. The memory centered me as I walked to meet the man who had overseen the company that had both made and nearly broken me. Wallace wasn't alone. He'd brought Derek, Elena, the legal counsel, and a board member I recognized as Patricia Winters. One of the few women on Pinnacle's board. Thank you for meeting on short notice, Wallace said as we settled around the conference table. His eyes took in the Solstice logo behind me. Quite a change of scenery. Change can be refreshing, I replied, noting his exhausted expression. I understand there have been developments at Pinnacle. Wallace nodded grimly. Richard Montgomery has been suspended pending investigation into unauthorized business practices and potential securities violations. The board has appointed an interim leadership committee while we evaluate options. I kept my face neutral, though triumph surged through me. I'm sorry to hear that. Corporate transitions can be challenging. Patricia Winters suppressed a smile. She'd always been the most progressive voice on Pinnacle's board, frequently overruled by Richard and his allies. Ms. Rodriguez, Wallace, continued. The board has reviewed your partnership proposal. We find the business case compelling. But, I prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. But we have concerns about the governance structure, specifically your requirement for a board seat and input on executive leadership. I'd expected resistance on this point. My investment in Solstice represents a significant personal commitment. I've built this partnership proposal around complementary strengths between our organizations. For that to work, there needs to be aligned leadership. Elena cleared her throat. There's also the matter of the confidential Pinnacle information you possess. While you obtained it legally during your employment, its use in competitive situations raises ethical questions. I haven't used any confidential information, I replied calmly. Nor do I need to. My knowledge of Pinnacle's operational weaknesses comes from 12 years of experiencing them firsthand. Derek leaned forward. Let's be direct. The board is prepared to move forward with your partnership proposal, including the Southern Region property transfers. We're even open to leadership restructuring. But we need assurances that this isn't simply a vehicle for personal vendettas. The call? Irony nearly made me laugh out loud. How many of Richard's decisions had been driven by personal preferences, biases, and grudges? But that was the game. When men made business personal, it was strategy. When women did it, it was emotional. Chapti? Only vendetta is against poor business practices, I said. Pinnacle has tremendous potential that's been limited by outdated thinking. My proposal unlocks that potential through strategic integration with Solstice's approach. Wallace studied me. And Richard? is no longer my concern. I met his gaze, steadily. My focus is building Solstice and creating a partnership that benefits both organizations. Whatever personnel decisions Pinnacle makes are yours alone. A flicker of respect crossed Wallace's face. The board will need certain safeguards in the agreement. Limits on competitive activities, information firewalls, that sort of thing. Reasonable, I conceded. I'll have Maria coordinate with Elena. On the legal framework. And the board seat? Patricia asked. Non-negotiable, I replied. I need to ensure the partnership operates as designed, but I'm open to discussing the scope of leadership input. The meeting continued for another hour, hashing out preliminary terms. By the end, we had the bones of an agreement. Solstice would acquire Pinnacle's southern properties in exchange for partial integration of operational systems and a limited partnership on international expansion. I would get my board seat. Pinnacle would get a lifeline out of the public relations disaster Richard had created. As they prepared to leave, Wallace held back. A moment, Ms. Rodriguez? When we were alone, his formal demeanor softened slightly. I owe you an apology. Not for Richard specifically. He's responsible for his own actions, but for the culture that enabled him. I saw the signs and chose not to act decisively. The admission surprised me. Why now? When we reviewed the executive turnover data after your departure, patterns emerged that were impossible to ignore. 3 VPs, all high performers, all citing better opportunities while privately reporting hostile treatment. Your confrontation forced us to look at what we'd been avoiding. I felt an unexpected wave of emotion, not for myself, but for those who hadn't had the resources or leverage to fight back. It's not enough to remove one problematic leader, I said quietly. The entire system needs restructuring, which is why your board seat makes sense, Wallace admitted. We need voices that will challenge the status quo. He extended his hand. I think this partnership could be transformative for both organizations. As I watched the Pinnacle delegation depart, Maria appeared at my side. Congratulations, boss, she said with a grin. You just rewrote the rules of the game. I laughed, the sound strange to my own ears, lighter than I'd felt in years. The game's not over yet. We still have a company to build. Speaking of which, Maria handed me a folder. Your first task as CEO, the Miami contractor problem. Inside was the contract I'd requested, along with a series of photos documenting substandard materials and safety violations, the same issues that had plagued Pinnacle's properties. Contact the Attorney General's office, I decided. This goes beyond breach of contract. And send the documentation to Wallace. They deserve to know who they've been dealing with. That evening, as I finally headed home, my phone rang. An unknown number. Jasmine Rodriguez, I answered, expecting another reporter. You win. Richard's voice was flat, drained of its usual pompous authority. I pulled over to the side of the road, heart suddenly pounding. Richard, I'm surprised to hear from you. I'm sure you are. Bitterness seeped through his words. Enjoying your victory? I'm focused on Solstice, I replied carefully. Your situation at Pinnacle isn't my concern. He laughed, a harsh sound. Of course it is. You orchestrated all of this. The acquisition, the timing, the board revolt. It was masterfully done. I'll give you that. Richard, no. Let me finish. His voice turned contemplative. You know, I never actually saw you. Not really. You were just background, the diversity, hire who surprisingly didn't fail. It never occurred to me that you could be dangerous. The casual admission of his dismissive view stung, even now. That was your mistake. One of many, apparently. The board's investigation found quite a pattern. He paused. For what it's worth, I didn't realize how much I'd targeted you until they laid it all out. The meeting exclusions, the credit, redistribution, the projects reassigned. The champagne wasn't an accident, I stated flatly. A long silence. No, it wasn't. I waited, unsure what he wanted from this conversation. They're announcing my resignation tomorrow, he finally continued. Golden parachute, non-disclosure agreements, the works. I keep the house in the Hamptons. They keep the scandal contained. That seems fair, I said, feeling oddly hollow. This was the victory I'd wanted, yet it brought less satisfaction than I'd imagined. One last thing, Richard said. Why did you do it this way? You could have just sued for harassment, taken a settlement. The question crystallized something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. Because a settlement would have been private, I answered slowly, hidden behind NDAs and legal jargon. This way, everyone sees. The pattern is exposed. Maybe the next Jasmine Rodriguez won't have to fight as hard. After the call ended, I sat in my car watching the city lights flicker on. Richard's question echoed in my mind. Why this way? Why so public? So dramatic? The answer was simpler than I'd admitted. Because I needed to prove, to myself most of all, that I could beat them at their own game. That the problem had never been me, my background, my gender, or my methods. The problem had been a system designed to exclude people like me from power. And now, I had changed that system forever. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. CNN. Business segment about Solstice Pinnacle deal airing in 10 minutes. They're calling it the Rodriguez Revolution. I smiled and put the car in drive. The revolution was just beginning. 3 months after the champagne incident, I stood on the rooftop terrace of Solstice, Miami, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold. Our grand reopening was tomorrow, and every detail was perfect. From the sustainable local artwork in each room to the innovative staff profit-sharing program that had attracted top talent from across the industry. Quite a view, Thomas remarked, joining me at the railing. Hard to believe this was the same property plagued by construction issues 3 months ago. Amazing what happens when you hire contractors based on quality rather than golf club memberships, I replied with a smile. Thomas laughed. The bookings are extraordinary. We're at 92% capacity for the first 3 months. And Pinnacle's Miami property? His smile turned sly. 68% and dropping. Their renovation is still ongoing with the new contractor you helpfully recommended to. Wallace. I sipped my champagne, the irony of the beverage not lost on me. How unfortunate for them. The success was sweeter than I'd imagined. Not just because Solstice was thriving while Pinnacle struggled with the southern properties, but because we were proving a point. Our inclusive leadership team, innovative approach to luxury, and ethical business practices weren't just morally superior, they were more profitable. My phone chimed with a calendar alert. Pinnacle board meeting, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Duty calls? Thomas asked, noticing my expression. My first official board meeting as Pinnacle's newest director. I gazed out at the horizon. Should be interesting. Planning to be diplomatic? He asked with a knowing look. Only as diplomatic as they deserve. I turned to view the property that symbolized my vision. The partnership is working, but Pinnacle's old guard is fighting change every step of the way. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Wallace called me yesterday. Asked if you were always this forceful in your approach. I laughed. What did you tell him? That he should count himself lucky. This is you being gentle. After Thomas left to supervise final preparations, I stayed on the rooftop alone, reflecting on the whirlwind 3 months. Solstice had expanded to 15 properties, with 3 more acquisitions pending. Our revolutionary approach to hospitality was making headlines in the industry, and Pinnacle, under interim leadership, was slowly beginning to reform its corporate culture. Richard had vanished from public view after his resignation, reportedly buying a vineyard in Portugal. The scandal had faded from the news, but its impact remained in concrete policy changes across the industry. 3 major hotel chains had announced new diversity initiatives in the wake of the Rodriguez Revolution. My phone buzzed again. This time with a text from Zoe, my former assistant who now led our employee development program. Check your email. You're going to want to see this immediately. Curious, I opened my inbox to find a message with the subject line, Confidential, Class Action Lawsuit Against Pinnacle Hospitality Group. My heart raced as I scanned the contents. A group of former Pinnacle employees, all women of color, were filing suit for systemic discrimination and harassment. Their attorneys were seeking my testimony about the company culture under Richard's leadership. This wasn't part of my plan, but perhaps it should have been. My personal victory meant little if the system remained unchanged for others who lacked my resources and leverage. I forwarded the email to Maria with a brief note. Thoughts? My instinct is to support them. Her response came within minutes. Absolutely support them. But carefully, this could impact the partnership if handled wrong. Let's discuss strategy in the morning. That night, in my suite overlooking the ocean, I drafted 2 emails. The first to Wallace, giving him a professional courtesy notice that I'd been contacted by the plaintiff's attorneys and intended to provide truthful testimony if required. The second to my personal attorney, instructing her to reach out to the class action lawyers with my willingness to participate. Sleep came more easily that night than it had in years. The path forward wasn't simple, but for the first time, it felt authentically mine. The next morning, I flew to New York for the Pinnacle board meeting. The company's headquarters felt strange now, familiar yet distant, like revisiting your childhood home after decades away. The security guard recognized me, his expression comically confused as he processed my new status. Ms. Rodriguez? Welcome. Back? Welcome. Thank you, Jim. I smiled, accepting the visitor badge that seemed absurd given my history here. Good to see you. The executive floor was quieter than I remembered, the frantic energy of Richard's regime replaced by something more measured. As I approached the boardroom, Wallace emerged to greet me. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming early. His expression was grave. I received your email about the lawsuit. I thought you should hear it from me directly. He nodded, leading me to a small conference room rather than the boardroom. The litigation committee is meeting now to discuss our response. Inside, I found Patricia Winters and Elena, the legal counsel, along with 2 board members I hadn't met before. Jasmine, Patricia greeted me warmly. Thank you for your transparency about the lawsuit. Elena was more reserved. We're still reviewing the claims. Some appear to predate your tenure at Pinnacle. Many do, I agreed. This has been a long-standing issue, not a recent development. The timing is problematic, one of the new board members commented, just as we're stabilizing after the Montgomery situation. With respect, I replied, the timing is not the problem. The culture that made this lawsuit inevitable is the problem. The room fell silent. Patricia exchanged a glance with Wallace. We've been reviewing your integration proposals for Solstice's management practices, Patricia said carefully. In light of these developments, perhaps we should accelerate implementation. This was an unexpected opening. I'd support that approach, particularly the blind recruitment process and compensation equity framework. Wallace cleared his throat. The board will need to vote, but there's growing consensus that more significant changes are needed. He looked directly at me. We'd like you to chair the Culture Transformation Committee, working with Patricia and HR leadership. The request surprised me. It was one thing to gain a board seat through leverage, quite another to be entrusted with reshaping the company's fundamental approach to its people. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. With one condition. Which is? Elena asked cautiously. That the lawsuit is approached as an opportunity for accountability and healing, not as a legal battle to be won at all costs. These women deserve to be heard and compensated fairly. Wallace's expression tightened slightly, but Patricia was nodding. "I'll take that recommendation to the full board," Wallace said eventually. "And now we should join the others. The meeting is about to begin." Walking into the Pinnacle boardroom as a director rather than an invited executive felt surreal. The massive table where I'd once stood presenting reports was now where I took my seat as an equal with those who had once judged me. The interim CEO, a competent but unimaginative industry veteran, led the meeting efficiently through quarterly results and strategic updates. When he reached the partnership with Solstice, all eyes turned to me. All eyes turned to me. The Miami property relaunch has exceeded expectations, I reported calmly. The integrated systems approach has reduced operational costs by 22% while improving guest satisfaction metrics. We recommend expanding the model to the remaining southern region properties immediately rather than phasing in over 6 months. The discussion that followed was respectful but pointed, with several directors questioning the accelerated timeline. I answered each concern with data and concrete examples, the same approach that had always served me well, but now they actually listened. By meeting's end, my recommendation had been approved, along with the formation of the Culture Transformation Committee under my leadership. As the directors filed out, Derek lingered. "Jasmine, a word?" I nodded, curious. Derek had maintained a carefully neutral position throughout the Richard debacle, neither ally nor enemy. "The CEO search committee is finalizing our shortlist next week," he said quietly. "Your name has been suggested." I blinked in surprise. "For Pinnacle CEO?" "The partnership with Solstice has been more successful than anticipated. Your leadership approach resonates with the younger board members." His expression was unreadable. "Would you be interested?" The question hit me like a physical force. 3 months ago, Richard's job would have been the ultimate victory. Now, I'm building something at Solstice, I said slowly. "Something I believe in," Derek nodded. "I thought you might say that. But the offer would include maintaining your role as Solstice chairwoman, with expanded authority over both companies. A hospitality group merger, I realized, with me as CEO of the combined entity?" "Precisely." He smiled slightly. "Think about it. Wallace is retiring next year. This could be the beginning of something truly transformative for the industry." As I flew back to Miami that evening, the sunlight fading over the clouds matched my contemplative mood. CEO of a merged Pinnacle Solstice would make me one of the most powerful women in the hospitality industry. The platform to create real change would be unprecedented. But power had never been my true goal. Justice, perhaps. Validation, certainly. Yet what I'd found in building Solstice was something deeper: purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "How was the Dragon's Lair?" "Interesting," I typed back. "They offered me the keys to the castle." "Pinnacle CEO?" "Potentially, after a merger." Her response took longer this time. "What are you thinking?" I gazed out the window at the darkening sky. "I'm thinking about what Abuela always says. It's not about reaching the top of the mountain, it's about who you are when you get there." When the plane landed, I had my answer. The next morning, I called Wallace. "I'm flattered by the CEO consideration," I began. "But I'm declining." Silence on the line, then. "May I ask why?" "Because merging the companies would mean sacrificing what makes Solstice special. I believe both organizations can thrive separately, partnering where it makes sense while maintaining distinct cultures." "And your role at Pinnacle?" "I'll continue as a board member and lead the Culture Transformation Committee. But my primary focus remains Solstice." That evening, I held an impromptu gathering for the Solstice executive team on the Miami rooftop. As the sun set over the ocean, I raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I toasted. "And to remembering where we came from, even as we decide where we're going." Later, alone at the railing, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the champagne stain that had catalyzed a corporate revolution, the humiliation that had hardened into determination, the path from front desk receptionist to CEO. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Pinnacle Hospitality Group announces settlement in discrimination lawsuit, commits to industry-leading diversity initiatives. I smiled, taking a sip of champagne as I watched the lights of Miami glitter below. The bitter taste that had haunted me for so long was gone, replaced by something sweeter. Victory. Not because I'd destroyed Richard, though that had certainly been satisfying. Not because I now controlled a successful company, though the power was undeniably vindicating, but because I'd changed the rules of the game, and somewhere out there, another Jasmine Rodriguez was watching, learning, and preparing to take her seat at the table, a table I had helped build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Don't miss